Hey everyone, while we prepare to get started for this panel on activists and practitioners, we're just going to wait a few moments for everyone to get loaded into the Zoom chat, and then we'll begin very shortly. Thank you. Hey everyone, we're going to wait a few moments for people to get loaded in, and then we'll start with our panel very soon. We're going to get started in just a few moments, everybody. Thanks for waiting. All right, everyone, welcome. And on behalf of the Oxford Migration Studies Society, welcome to our annual conference on borders and justice. I'm Trin Trong. You might recognize me from the keynote address yesterday with Harsha Walia, and I am a social media manager of OMSS. And I would just like to warmly and excitedly thank everyone for coming. Times are really weird because everything's online, so thank you for more of your screen time. I just wanted to take a moment to flag some logistics before introducing the others on your screen. So after everyone presents, there will be a Q&A at the end. Please feel free to type your Q&A into the box as you think of them, with the name of whoever the question is directed to, if that's applicable. And you'll also have the choice to upvote and comment on each other's questions. Now I'd like to formally introduce our generous and formidable chair, Dr. Martina Tazzioli. Martina is a lecturer in politics and technology at Goldsmiths. She's the author of many interesting books, including The Making of Migration, The Biopolitics of Mobility at Europe's Borders, Spaces of Governmentality, Autonomous Migration in the Arab Uprisings, and Tunisia as a Revolutionized Space of Migration. She's also the co-editor of Foucault and the History of Our Present, and Foucault and the Making of Subjects. So if you're a fellow Foucauldian like me, please check out her work. She's also on the editorial board of the Journal of Radical Philosophy, and her new book project is entitled Border Abolitionism, Migration Containment and the Genealogies of Struggles and Rescue. And now I'm gonna let her take it from here, so please enjoy our panel. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I'm extremely pleased today to chair this panel with 5 brilliant speakers. So I'm gonna introduce each of them, and then I will hand over to the first presenter, who is Chloe Power from Border Violence Monitoring Network. Everyone will speak for around 10 minutes, sharp. And we will continue with a conversation, and we'll open up to Q&A. So the first presenter, as I said, is Chloe Power from Border Violence Monitoring Network. The presentation is entitled Pre-Removed, Investigating Right Suspension Through Carceral Violence and the Link to Pushback from Immigration Detention Center in Greece. So Chloe Powers is a queer feminist and border abolitionist researcher and activist living between Athens and Lesbos. She's a member of the Border Violence Monitoring Network, which documents violence against people on the move in the Balkans. After Chloe, Esmeralda Flores Marcial from Otros Dreamers and Acción will present on deportation and return, undocumented Mexicans in Mexico. Esmeralda was first an undocumented migrant in the US and is now a return migrant in Mexico. As such, she has first and experiences of the challenges migrants face, which has shaped her professional career. She is currently coordinator of accompaniment at the grassroots Otros Dreamers and Acción. She is a graduate of the Faculty of Law of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and is working on her thesis. She has previously worked in places like the Law Clinic of UNAM, and she has also worked in Le Desert AC, an organization that specializes on LGBTQ plus rights. After Esmeralda, Bill McKeith from Oxford Against Immigration Detention will present on how to bridge gaps and organize in the field of migration. Some examples from the field of immigration detention. Bill has been working to end immigration detention since before Campsfield Detention Center opened near his home in Oxford in 1993. He is or has been active in campaign to close Campsfield, Barbed Wire Britain, and Anti-Detention Network, Oxford Against Immigration Detention, MigEurope, and the Detention Forum. Then after Bill, Jane from Statewatch will present on Frontex as figurehead, how the agency channels they use externalized migration control. So Jane has worked with Statewatch since April 2019 on the project EU Justice and Home Affairs Agency, Transparency, Accountability, and Fundamental Rights. She leads research on Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, and related topics. Jane also works as a freelancer researcher on a range of fundamental rights issues, currently investigating the role of deprivation of sunlight in torture and detention settings. And last but not least, Erik Marquardt, who is a member of the European Parliament. Erik is a photographer, but has been a member of the European Parliament since 2019, the 2019 European election, as part of the Green Party, and his main topics are refugees, migration, and human rights. So it's a great pleasure to open this roundtable of amazing presentation with Chloe Power from Border Violence Monitoring Network. So Chloe, you have 10 minutes.
Great, thank you so much. So first off, I'd like to introduce Border Violence Monitoring Network a little bit. So the BVMN is an independent horizontal network of organizations and projects, mainly based in the Balkan region and in Greece, that monitors human rights violations at the external borders of the European Union and advocates to stop violence exerted against people on the move. BVMN was founded in 2017 when several organizations became aware of the existence of violent pushbacks of asylum seekers and refugees along the Balkans and in Greece, and began to document such cases. The network has developed a common framework of recording testimonies and supporting evidence, which after going through a process of fact-checking is published in an open access database. BVMN also publishes monthly reports covering pushbacks along the Greek and Balkan routes, analyzing in detail pushbacks in specific geographic areas, escalating violence, excessive use of force, cases of alleged torture, and other key issues. And these testimonies serve as a basis of the network's both advocacy and research-related projects, which address both kind of local, European, and international levels. So today, I would like to speak about state violence against people on the move in Greece, and in particular focusing on two parallel trends, those being increases in incarceration of people on the move and pushbacks. And with this kind of a lack of accountability and level of impunity that we've observed on the part of the authorities. This comes as the topic of some of our most recent research with BVMN. Yes, so focusing on these two trends and their intersection, we argue provides insight into the changing landscape of state responses to migration, increased violence against people on the move, and yes, a lack of accountability on the part of the authorities. So over the course of the last year, human rights watchdog organizations and media sources throughout Greece and abroad have documented an unprecedented level of border violence against people on the move, perpetrated by the Greek authorities. Pushbacks in the Aegean Islands and Greek back into Turkey have become increasingly frequent and alarmingly violent. Along the Evros, pushbacks appear to becoming increasingly systematized, reaching deep into the interior of the country, where people, for example, are picked up in urban centers even, such as Thessaloniki, Athens, Igoumenitsa, Patras, showing really that the precarious position of transit communities is across the breadth of the Greek interior at this point, where the threat of pushbacks is never really dispelled. State responses to these allegations of pushbacks and kind of the pressure resulting from the mounting evidence of detected human rights violations have been lacking, to say the least, in the sense that they've been mainly met with denial. So Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis recently said that, or focused on kind of the successful prevention of illegal border crossing and denied any instances of pushbacks occurring. This comes also kind of in contrast with other responses by ministers. For example, the minister responsible for the Coast Guard recently stated that Greece had successfully managed to prevent over 10,000 people from entering the territory. So some kind of inconsistencies there. Practices of detention, meanwhile, and carceral-based logics have come to define in some ways the landscape of migration management in Greece. People on the move, migrants, refugees, are held in police stations in urban areas, at times for months without access to legal support or clear justification for why they're being held. In 2019, there was an announcement that camps on the Aegean Islands will be turned into closed centers. And construction of these closed centers has already begun on Samos and Kos and is still pending on Lesbos. On Lesbos, actually, already we see a similar situation to what we expect from these closed camps, in that the inhabitants are only allowed to leave for a couple hours a week usually, and otherwise the camp is closed. Further installation of a comprehensive surveillance system was announced recently for the camps in the Aegean Islands. The system will integrate CCTV systems and video monitoring, drone flights over facilities, perimeter violation alarms, cameras, control gates, all of these sorts of things. Again, creating an increasingly carceral atmosphere and turning camps into closed centers and places of detention, broadly speaking. In terms of legal changes in the situation with regards to detention, in 2020, the International Protection Act entered into force, which has pretty drastically shifted the landscape in Greece with regards to detention, in that it increased the time frame of detention up to 18 months, which may reach to 36 months if in kind of correspondence with immigration detention. This happens specifically within the context of pre-removal detention sites, which, while initially these were for only those kind of awaiting the execution of a pending deportation order, now has been expanded to other kind of people in Greece. The IPA, the International Protection Act's overall effect is that it has legitimized the systematic use of detention and return procedures, and it's been widely criticized by NGOs, which have described it as significantly deteriorating the rules around detention. On this issue in 2020, the Council of Europe reported that systematic detention of people on the move cannot be the immediate response. Moreover, Greece cannot be so ill-prepared to receive new migrants that it holds them in inhumane and degrading conditions. To this, again, the official response of the Greek state was that no sufficient evidence had been presented regarding misconduct on the part of the Greek police, and no complaints to date have been lodged against the police departments or detention facilities mentioned. Well, we know this is not true. In practice, what this looks like in terms of kind of this increase in the use of detention is that nearly all the people that Border Violence Monitoring Network member projects encounter, whether they be asylum seekers or people that are looking to move through Greece and onward, will spend some time in detention, and often increasingly kind of protracted amounts of time. protest by those incarcerated within these centers is nothing new and has been occurring since their creation in 2012. In January 2021, we had another incident of protests within the Paranesti Pre-Removal Detention Center, which is in northeastern Greece, where the detainees were protesting the extension of their detention past 18 months. And they were violently attacked by police officers who stormed into their cells, beating them with batons, and resulting in a situation that was described as mass torture. There was an official complaint lodged about this, but again, there's been no kind of response to date. As BVMN, we've also documented several cases of pushbacks happening from pre-removal detention facilities themselves. And this is the subject of our current research, which will be published in about a week and a half. From several different pre-removal detention facilities, particularly Paranesti and Xanthi, as well as Amygdaleza, there are now first-hand accounts of people actually being taken from these centers and then eventually pushed over the Evros. This is important that it implicates broader structures of detention within pushbacks. It involves multiple units of police, multiple sites of detention, whether it be the pre-removal detention facilities themselves or the other spaces of detention that they are held in along the way, and kind of hints at a much broader issue and not just a situation where it's just police officers, the Evros, that are complicit in pushbacks. When looking more broadly speaking at practices of mass incarceration and violence in detention, as well as pushbacks, it's also important to keep in mind kind of the broader context in Greece at the moment, particularly with regards to police brutality and state repression. In the last year, the New Democracy government has used the pandemic and lockdown as an excuse to significantly expand the power of the police, while violence and abuses of these new powers has largely gone unchecked. In early March, the Greek ombudsperson Andreas Potakis said that reports of police violence have expanded by 75% alone in the last year. Much of this violence, as we can imagine, has also disproportionately targeted migrants, asylum seekers, and people of color. Whereas wealthier neighborhoods, white neighborhoods have really, in the urban centers, been left untouched. For example, here in Athens, in heavily migrant neighborhoods, it's fairly regular to see large numbers of police going through public parks, going through squares, and either arresting people or checking their papers and finding them almost on a daily basis. And even so, this March, the situation reached kind of a boiling point when it came to instances of police brutality, with a number of very public instances that kind of went viral in all of this. And even then, the official state response was to blame the opposition party for stirring up protests and denying any responsibility, saying that police brutality was a global issue and that Greece did not have a bad record. Overall, we argue that carceral and expulsion-based logics have come to define, in some ways, the landscape of border control in Greece, creeping deep into the interior of the country and affecting transit as well as other communities. The overlay of EU externalization and domestic authoritarian policies has produced a climate in which police brutality and weaponized detention are kind of the go-to tools for handling human mobility. The myriad types of violence used are a feature of the sweeping remit granted to the Hellenic police, Coast Guard, and military, whereby evident the lack of accountability mechanisms and how I think this has really become the most pressing issue.
Thank you very much, Chloe. So I hand over to Esmeralda Flores Marcial from Otros Dreamers and Acción. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martina. I really appreciate it. I'm going to start by sharing a quick video, so please let me know if you can see it.
We are the mothers, the fathers, spouses, children, and siblings
affected by your cruel and inhumane deportation laws.
We are from your hometowns.
Charleston, South Carolina, 3 years of family separation.
Los Angeles, California, with 10 years of family separation. Kannapolis, North Carolina, with 2.5 years of family separation.
Dalton, Georgia, with 5 years of family separation.
Bradenton and Arcadia, Florida, 11 years of family separation. Chicago, Illinois, 9 years of family separation.
Dalton, Georgia, with 8 years of family separation.
Charlotte, North Carolina, with 4 years of family separation.
Bradenton, Florida, 11 years of family separation.
Denver, Colorado, with 4 years of family separation.
Las Vegas, Nevada, 5 years of family separation.
Newberry, South Carolina, with 11 years of family separation.
Montebello, California, with 13 years away from my community.
Las Vegas, Nevada, 8 years of family separation.
Fontana, California, lived 9 years of family separation.
We are part of the thousands of deported and forcibly returned to Mexico, part of the millions around the world living in limbo, in exile, and away from our families. We are the people who have been illegalized by your laws. It is time to be bold, to stand up together for true accountability, reparation, and justice. COVID-19 has forced millions of people to be away from their loved ones for the first time, to connect to funerals and family events over video calls. Our deported and returned community has endured this kind of painful isolation for decades. For those who are mourning our lost loved ones, it is too late now.
Time to be bold and reunite all our families.
Time to be bold and release all detainees, saving lives from COVID and ending the off-the-rails for-profit detention industry once and for all.
I hope everybody had a chance to see that. I'm sorry to cut it halfway through, but the time is limited. And we can share the link so you can continue to watch the rest of the video. After this initial introduction, it goes on to show some demands. And the point of showing you this video is for you to be able to see the people that are part of the community of returnees and deportees, specifically in Mexico, and more focus on Mexico City, even though we do have people from all over the country in that video. And I wanted you to see them instead of, or see us instead of me giving you a 2-minute introduction, so that you can get the feeling of who we are. And what I will do today is first start by explaining what is ODA, how this community is formed, what we do, and then continue on with an overview of the challenges we face when we're back in our home country, in our country of origin. So Otros Dreamers in Acción, or ODA, is a grassroots organization that is based off in Mexico City, Mexico. And we are a community that is made up of returnees and deportees that accompanies other returnees and deportees. This means most of us are Mexican nationals or Mexican born, and lived or migrated to the United States for several reasons, lived undocumented for a long time or all of our lives sometimes in the US, and were forced to come back to Mexico either through deportation or through forced return. The difference between them being deportation actually entails a administrative process with migration authorities, and for forced return or return doesn't have this administrative process. There might have never been any interaction with migration authorities, but due to the lack of access to rights or due to a threat of deportation and forced return, we decided to come back to Mexico. And neither of those deportees, or neither of us, deportees or returnees, does it entail that at any point we had any contact with the criminal law. As we know, immigration law is administrative law to begin with, or at its origins. Some of us have, but not. It doesn't necessarily entail that to begin with, to be a returnee or a deportee. And Otros Dreamers en Acción, or ODA, actually began with a research project in 2014, where one of the co-founders, Dr. Jill Anderson, noticed somebody that looked Mexican, speaking this perfect English in downtown Mexico City. That's how she came to know the call centers and all of the returnees and deportees that were hired in these call centers in downtown. a book came out of this experience, out of this research, with 27 young adults telling their stories in the book called Los Otros Dreamers, which the second edition just launched, by the way. And they found each other as a community. Once this community was formed, they formed a kind of virtual network, and then a collective. And then in 2017, because of the Donald Trump election, they decided to form ODA, like a legal organization in Mexico, because they feared more deportation, massive deportations and massive returns. And we've been active ever since. In 2017, I joined the team in 2018, and I'm currently coordinator of accompaniment. And we are a civil organization, but we also are the people directly affected by deportation and forced return, like the video mentioned. And we have created a community and a network that helps us fight all of this state violence. The two main pillars of ODA are art and activism, through our coordination of Pocha House, which Pocha House is the name of our cultural center in Mexico City. And the other pillar is the accompaniment, which is the actual accompaniment of cases of the community based on our experiences and on our knowledges that each of us have faced when having to return to Mexico. And today I want to focus a little bit on how it is that undocumented nationals, or Mexican nationals rather, become undocumented or are undocumented when they are first back in Mexico, which you would think, right? One of our biggest problems in the US was not having the proper documentation to be able to stay there regularly. And then once we're back in our home country, then that should all go away because now we are nationals. But that is not the case because illegality is created. And so in Mexico, we face some of the same challenges that we did when we were undocumented in the US. For example, whenever you get to Mexico, Mexico doesn't have a universal ID or a universal official state ID, to say it in a way. And so something that is called the INE, I-N-E, which is a voter ID, is the unofficial, widely accepted ID. This INE, which is to no one's surprise, has a lot of locks to be able to access to it because it is not meant to safeguard the right to an identity or to nationality for that matter. And you have to be 18, you have to get certain requirements, right? One of those is having another official ID. So we are in the limbo constantly of how can we get the official ID if you need an official ID for that ID. It's like a never-ending story. And without this ID, right, because you also have to have your birth certificate and this official ID I talked about, and a proof of residence, which is really hard for returnees and deportees because sometimes we do not have a place to come back. You know, the Mexican government often says, well, there's no need for more than 3 days of shelter for returnees or deportees because unlike refugees or migrants in transit, they have family here. And that is not the case. After 20, 30, 40 years of living in the United States, the family networks, the support networks are no longer existent because of the border dynamics. And what we do, or first of all, this lack of INE means that since we don't have access to an ID, therefore no recognition to our identity, we also lack access to housing, employment, education. What is the point of today's presentation? Just getting out there that we exist, that we are a community that is currently resisting and accompanying in other cases, and that we are the other side of this coin. You know, we understand and we totally also fight for the causes that other migration organizations fight for, because our families are still in the US, because our families are still undocumented. But we need to see both sides in order to get something done, and we need to work together to change these policies. For example, and just as a last thought, this video that I would encourage you to see is a video that promotes a plan that's called the New Way Forward, that is trying to be passed in the United States, that would give a pathway for some people to return and reunite with their families. And it is also part of another campaign called No One Left Behind, which is formed by the No One Left Behind coalition, that is pushing for the New Way Forward to be something wider, you know, to recognize that we are here, that we have existed for a long time, and that returnees or deportees are not only something that is in Mexico. I'm sure they're in every other country that traditionally expulses migrants. And so we would really, really, really like to leave today with the question of, maybe I don't know any migrants per se, but do I know a returned migrant or a deportee in my country? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Esmeralda. So now I hand over to Bill McKeith from Oxford Against Immigration Detention. Bill, you have 10 minutes.
Thanks very much. I wanted to talk from the point of view of a very local, long-running campaign, but I ought just to say briefly that in the UK, we are the only European country without a time limit on immigration detention. But a positive thing to report is that the number of people detained and the number of detention centres has gone down in recent years, and the current capacity of about 2,200 places in immigration detention centres is much down on a higher figure of about 3,500. And that's the result of a mass movement against detention. Not to say that the new Johnson government isn't intent on reversing that with a lot of quasi-detention, so-called open asylum seeker accommodation centres. But I wanted to get back to the subject of the talk. How to bridge gaps and organize in the field of migration. So the various headings I've chosen to talk under. One of the key gaps that we've had to bridge in campaigning for an end to immigration detention in our local campaign against the local detention is between the people outside and the people inside the detention centres. And this is really key because there's nothing so powerful in this movement as the voices and the actions of the people inside detention. And it's very difficult to do this working closely together because of the restraints on the people detained. But we found that a good place to start is the monthly demonstrations we had, which were demonstrations of solidarity, where we were able to have some direct communication by shouting with the people detained. And in recent years, it's been possible to have telephone conversations with people detained during the detentions every month, the demonstrations every month, which of course can be very powerful. When people in detention are taking direct action by a hunger strike or issuing protests, we try to amplify their voices by publicizing them in the local media and also having a demonstration of solidarity at 6 o'clock on the following evening when the protest starts, and also a vigil in the town centre. Okay, the second bridging gaps. I wanted to pick up on something that was said in the notes from Otros Dreamers in Action, which was about the importance of arts and culture in moving forward a campaign or a movement. And we've been able to publish statements by immigration detainees. We have two websites. One of them is Campaign to Close Campsfield, now closed, and the other one is the current Oxford Against Immigration Detention. And on them you'll find a collection of statements and writings by immigration detainees called Voices from Detention. We've also published a collection of poetry, which is very powerful, from people in detention. We've done street theatre with a group of Kurdish refugees about it's a narrative of that travels from Kurdistan to Oxford Immigration Detention Centre. We have a former Home Secretary of the UK, Jack Straw, has a country cottage in Oxfordshire, and one Christmas we set up an immigration detention centre around the front of his house, complete with the fence and cameras on top, and with the local media interest that helped to promote knowledge of opposition to detention. There are theatre groups we've worked with, like Ice and Fire, a very good theatre group that does drama relating to immigration detention, and authors like Michael Morpugo have published stories, many of them for children, which are very powerful. Now, bridging a gap between activists, if you like, and academics. Well, I think the key area is research. Research is absolute key. So you've got researchers here speaking on the panel, and activists can provide or facilitate information to go to researchers, and the researchers' publications are used in pressing for political change, which is, so we've tried to work very closely with researchers, and we've welcomed working with academics. I mean, in Oxford, for instance, there are 3 different centres of study into migration: the Refugee Studies Centre, the Centre of Migration Policy and Society, Compass, and the Border Criminology's Department of the Law Faculty. And all this collection of knowledge is absolutely key to moving things forward. One thing we don't like very much is people who come and just try and use the information which we in our campaign have, and just use it for academic career without the person doing any concrete work of solidarity. So that's something we want to be careful about, how we use our time. We've worked with Oxford Migrant Solidarity Group in the university, and we've worked closely with the Oxford University Amnesty International Group, in particular, twice collecting the signatures of 20 heads of Oxford colleges, signatures to letters calling for an end to immigration detention. Have I got another minute or two? Yeah, okay. I've got 3 other headings. Working with lawyers has been absolutely key on occasion to stopping the expansion of immigration detention. Not talking about individual cases, but calling for this detention centre not to be open, not to be expanded. And lawyers have been key, for instance, in stopping the Campsfield Detention Centre expanding, and stopping, quite recently, a few months ago, the building of a refugee and asylum seeker accommodation centre next door to the Yarlswood Immigration Detention Centre. Then there's bridging the gap between the campaign and, if you like, the rest of society. I just wanted to mention work that we've done, speaking in schools about detention centres, having stalls in the town centre, trying to get coverage in local print and broadcast media. We've worked in trade unions, and we've been able to get 6 national trade unions to adopt a policy of an end to immigration detention. And of course, we've worked with political parties. 2 years ago, the Labour Party voted to end, at its annual conference, voted to end all immigration detention. And we work with Tories as well, Conservatives. Sometimes they will support a local campaign against an expansion. And the coalition building we've found is very important for pressurizing for campaigns. So there's something called the Detention Forum in Britain, which is a reformist program organization calling for a time limit of 28 days, judicial oversight, and so on. So that's an organization that has about 50 different organizations which are members of it. And finally, international, just to say very briefly, we've worked with Migreurope initially on their cartography, mapping detention centers across Europe. That kind of research has been important, I think, in building up a knowledge base for campaigning against immigration detention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Now Jane from Statewatch will speak about Frontex.
Hi, hi everybody, and thank you very much for having me today. It's really nice to follow Bill speaking and be in a panel with lots of organisers and practitioners, because I think Statewatch is sort of representing the more research side maybe on this panel. Yes, so our background as an organisation is in research and education, and really using information and transparency and exposing unpublished documents in an attempt to enable activism, activity, and open discussion. Yeah, and I think as an aim, we do try to make that go two ways. So we listen to activists and frontline practitioners, as well as trying to kind of bridge that gap between them, research, and also policymakers. So trying to create that communication. So we are, Statewatch is a civil liberties charity publishing research. We're actually 30 this year. And we have been leading on issues of government transparency, policing and surveillance, and more recently with a focus on migration, traditionally with a focus on EU institutions. So I came in as you said in our introductions to this to Statewatch 2 years ago to join the project EU Justice and Home Affairs Agency's Accountability, Transparency and Human Rights. I'd just completed my LLM in International Human Rights Law at the time, after spending time in Athens with various solidarity projects. And I joined Statewatch 2 years ago with a focus on Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. The topic that we've gone for today with Frontex is the figurehead and how it channels the externalised border control of the EU. Sort of brings together the outputs of the last 2 years of research that we've done. So we've published a long report about Frontex's growing powers in deportations and its ever expanding remit in that area, as its mandate seems to grow and grow every few years at the moment. We're also currently working on 2 reports, one of which is examining Frontex's role in the gathering and processing of personal data, and the other one is directly looking at Frontex's role in non-EU states, so how it works with states outside the EU, more or less to apply the EU's border agenda there. And I think Frontex is particularly high on a lot of research agendas at the moment. It's received a lot of attention recently due to investigations published in the autumn linking the agency to pushbacks in the Aegean. I've just realised I forgot to start my timer, so I'll take a few minutes off and start just so I have an idea of how I'm going.
I will tell you when you're about to.
Okay, thank you. It's just always good to keep on track. But and the reason that we chose to word our title today this way, with Frontex as a figurehead rather than as the kind of sole problem, is that a lot of responses to the scandals that were exposed in the autumn really focused on Leggeri, the executive director, Fabrice Leggeri's leadership of the agency, and other improvements that could be made to the working style and culture of Frontex. So those issues, as highlighted in an internal working group of Frontex's management board, included a working culture that discouraged incident reporting, lack of independent oversight, growing power and influence of the agency. And these are all certainly very huge issues, so it's very easy to focus on them, but it's important to maintain maintain the concept that Frontex is an outcome of EU policies, and it isn't the sole problem. So in a new series that we're working on at Statewatch, and in our advocacy attempts with other researchers and organisations, including Migrop, who've been mentioned today, and Border Violence Monitoring Network, who are here, we hope to show how Frontex is the outcome of policy and priorities of the EU and at EU and member state level. And so it isn't defective, as a lot of for example, the calls for Leggeri to resign would imply. This is how it is intended to work, and that's what the problem is. So I guess to relate back to the theme of borders and justice, there's 2 ways we can really look at Frontex's activities at the moment. So firstly, at its operations conducting surveillance at the EU's external borders. and the lack of clarity over the activities that make up those operations. And then also how Frontex's role beyond EU's external borders is expanding. So that would incorporate, for example, status agreements that have been signed between the EU and Balkan states, allowing Frontex officers to have executive powers on the territory, for example, of Albania and Montenegro, but also an area that's much less documented and a little bit harder to pin down is Frontex's operations with and in states much further afield. So to focus firstly on surveillance at sea, which has been, well, surveillance at external borders, much of the recent coverage of this topic has focused on sea and specifically the Aegean Sea. So as I'm sure many people in the audience and in the panel will be very aware, since October, there have been numerous investigations, inquiries, and legal cases have arisen about the agency trying to expose, to fact check, and to hold accountable the agency for its actions in or knowledge of various pushbacks that have happened in the Aegean. One of the outcomes of this has been a European Parliament scrutiny group on Frontex, which is quite a big step actually, especially as Frontex's executive director did seem extremely, well, said he was very going to be very cooperative with this group, share all the information that they were going to ask for. So I think back in January when it was announced, it seemed like it was going to be a very, have quite high potential for real accountability and to really listen to a lot of testimony and evidence from the external border areas where a lot of pushbacks happen. Well, I suppose, yeah, where all of them do. And yeah, and I think a note to say on that topic is really that yeah, that's also starting to epitomise this problem of Frontex being a product of EU institutions, and it is an EU institution, and its accountability is now limited to the political priorities of the members of this scrutiny group. So there were many experts, witnesses who were proposed to participate in hearings of this group who haven't been invited, civil society, including Statewatch, including Border Violence Monitoring Network, were proposed as experts to be consulted by this group and haven't ended up being invited to the hearings. And it's also quite difficult to be sure how to submit evidence that we have to the process. So that's quite yeah, I think that's sort of where things are at with that scrutiny group at the moment. Hearings are ongoing. They should be public, and technically they are public, but it's not particularly well broadcast when they're on. So there's limits to accountability in that sense, and they're also not really bearing in mind the whole scope of Frontex activity that's relevant. So for example, they're not bearing in mind Frontex as an information gatherer, Frontex as a surveyor, for example, in the Western Mediterranean, providing coordinates to certain coast guards and not to vessels that are much closer and could conduct operations. So yeah, to flag there just that there's this huge area that's not really being looked into by the groups supposed to be holding the agency to account so far. And then just to really mention quickly, I think I might have maximum a minute left, yeah, Frontex's role in pushing border control further and further beyond the EU's own external borders was an outcome of the 2019 regulation revision. Previously, Frontex had been allowed to have officers in neighbouring states to the EU. It can now deploy officers to any state beyond the EU's borders. And in the agreements that we've seen so far that seem very likely to be the template for future agreements, this involves immunity, criminal and civil immunity of Frontex officers in non-EU states, as long as activities are carried out in the operational plan. Those plans are never public. So it's completely, again, at the executive director's discretion to determine whether actions were in the under this operational plan, essentially. And then also just to flag that they can consult, in some cases, national databases, and they can also use executive powers, and in some cases carry weapons as well. So just kind of looking at at the expanding powers of this agency, like within and without the EU, and concerns that the accountability structures that are growing, which is hopeful, are not enough to kind of contain the powers of the agency. So I'll wrap up there. I'm sorry for overgoing.
Thank you. No, perfect. Thank you very much, Jane. So Erik Marquardt, last presenter, and then we open to discussion and Q&A.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also for the presentations. I expected a little bit that we already have received many informations when when it's my turn to speak a little bit, and that's why I try to keep it rather short, because what we saw, what we also see in the reality, but what we also heard in the presentations is that we have basically undignified conditions at the Europe's external borders. We have really insane, worrying reception conditions, illegal pushbacks, lack of access to lawyers, no medical or psychological support which is sufficient. So basically we have many problems, and we see a systematic violation of law by state actors, which is also very worrying, of course. And we see an EU agency, for example, helping to violate human rights. We see so many problems, and we see European governments trying to justify this reality also by using a strategy of turning facts into opinions. I think Chloe has also her experiences, the others maybe also, that you can find out some facts, you can talk about the reality, and in the end you have European governments, very boring to me, who just say, no, that's not the truth. This is not a video, it's a deep fake propaganda piece of the Turkish government or whatever. So we have a misinformation strategy with the aim to justify all what is happening external borders. And the question is why are we in this situation? I think that the European government, since at least 2015, have somehow found a strategy for themselves, not all the governments maybe, but a majority of the governments, which was basically to copy arguments and strategies of the far right to fight against the far right. So they justified their actions. Maybe they justify them also for themselves when they are lying, that it's important to reduce the numbers of arrivals at the Europe's external borders to fight against the far right, because if the number is increasing, if the number of arrivals is increasing, the far right will be stronger, and then that is not good for everyone. So basically they are doing far right politics with the justification that they're against the far right. Sounds not very smart. I also think that it is not a very smart strategy, but the only goal of the government at the moment is to reduce the numbers, whatever it takes. And if they're willing to attack human dignity, break their own laws, and abolish the right to asylum, for example, in order to achieve this goal, we will not succeed. So we can criticize, of course, and we should, and it's a very important work to criticize Frontex for what they are doing. It's important to make visible that these illegal pushbacks are happening. It's important to speak about the undignified living condition at the external borders. But in the end, I have the feeling that we are in a situation where we do not succeed. We will not have dignified living conditions by just criticizing the living conditions, and we don't have a lack of solutions or resources to finance the solutions or whatever. We just have a lack of willingness to change the strategy of governments, which I explained before. And I think as long as we have this strategy and a feeling in the European society that migration is somehow connected to a crisis, that we are in a migration crisis at least for 6 years now. As long as we have this feeling, we will not find solutions. It's very strange if you also, for example, look at the arrivals, the number of arrivals or asylum applications in Greece. In 2015-16, there was 1 million arrivals in Greece. And last year there was around 10,000. So if I'm not wrong, 100 times less. So 1% of the arrivals in 2015 last year. But still, the government is saying it's too much. It's too much. It's a crisis. And we have this crisis. When we have the feeling that there is a crisis, we will not have a situation where people don't feel that it's a problem. So if it's connected to a situation where everybody is saying we have a problem, I can say, for example, the problem is that the living conditions are not dignified. Others say it's a problem because too many people arrive there or whatever. But as long as we have the feeling that there is a problem, we will have different opinions, a strong far right, and governments which do not understand what they are doing. So that's why I chose the headline of my small intervention to say, make migration boring again, because I think migration was reality, is reality, and will be reality. And it makes no sense to fight against the reality all the time. I think it's important to understand that we have to organize migration, that we also have to find a system in Europe which is able to deal in a dignified and rule of law based way with irregular migration of, I would say, maybe 500,000 a year. And as long as we do not have this goal to just deal with, for example, 500,000 people which arrive irregularly, and we will not have a solution, humane solution, at least not for the European asylum policy. And that's why I think we should just accept the reality and make migration boring again, because if we are able, and we can be able, that's not the biggest deal for 27 European Union countries to deal with, for example, 500,000 people a year. And when we just accept the challenge and organize it and create the capacity to deal with the people and their dignity, then there is no crisis anymore, then there is no feeling of problems anymore, and then we can make migration boring again. Then everybody can discuss the topic in a quite normal way without having the feeling of a crisis, which in the end only helps the far right to deal with the feelings of people and the, so to say, dignity of other people. And that was my small intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik, for this provoking and, in my opinion, extremely timely intervention about also the difficulties of crafting a left-wing critique of the border regime and also a left-wing intervention. I've summarized the key questions for our presenters. Just a couple of points that I think we can take from this brilliant presentation. I think that all this presentation highlighted the heterogeneity of practices of resistance, right, against the border regime, so that there is not one way to do it, but actually there are multiple tactics, and drawing on what the presenter said, what Jane and Chloe presented about the importance of documenting state violence, but also disclosing unpublished documents. And then, so this range of practices that include also artistic intervention, militant research, and Bill's presentation has been key for problematizing, right, the role of academics, of university, but also collecting voices from detention, Esmeralda's presentation, and also making states and European agency accountable. So this is the first point, heterogeneity of practices of resistance, that I think is crucial for also debating what raising justice claims in relation to borders mean concretely nowadays. And the second point that I think came out from this presentation is also, on the one hand, the strengthening of the dramatic and violent strengthening of the EU politics of externalization, but also different way of enacting externalization that is not only in terms of offshoring border controls, but also through this direct intervention of EU agency, as Jane described. So this direct intervention of EU actors. And I think this is a key point. And in relation to that, a multiplication of spaces of confinement that all of you have described, and also difficulties in grasping these ambiguous, ambivalent spaces of confinement. And before starting with the question, yeah, I think that Erik's presentation really address a key point. So what does it mean to rethink the critique of the border regime beyond the moment of denunciation, right? And what does it mean? In which sense can we improve the living condition of migrants or and Europeans at the same times, and not only beyond, also beyond an exclusive focus on Europe. And Esmeralda presentation, I think, has been paramount from this point of view, the need of connecting, of course, different spaces of containment. So let me start with a question for Chloe, which is about the relationship that come from the participants, the relationship between Greece, the problematic relationship, and the European Commission. You have demonstrated, you have explained the pushback policy, Greek pushback policies, but also as the people are, some of the people who are attending the events are highlighting there is this extremely ambivalent position on the part of the EU, right? So the Council of Europe is criticizing Greece, but they're also considering, someone is asking, providing relief by taking migrants or providing resources to support the local communities. And at the same time, others are asking, is this like a Greek strategies, or to what extent we should rather target Europe? So this is the first question. And how, in which way your organization is focusing on advocacy on EU's accountability.
Thank you. And thank you to all the other panelists. Your presentations were really wonderful. On this note, so it's, I would say complicity or involvement comes on multiple levels, in the sense that the European Union is still funding a lot of the camps. In a meeting we had with the head of the UNHCR for Greece, for example, a couple of months ago, it's clear that this stuff is happening. It's clear that pushbacks are happening. This is known, this is documented, this is spoken about. But when we asked, okay, what can you do about it? What steps can be taken to make sure that this doesn't happen and that the Greek state doesn't continue acting with such impunity? The response was, we need more reports, or we need more proof. After saying, okay, it's clear. And so it feels as though we're stuck in kind of a feedback loop of like, okay, more documentation is needed, but there's already documentation proving that these things are happening, and a shifting of responsibility between actors that in the end, nothing has changed. And the violations of human rights and kind of the violence is ongoing, but without anyone really taking decisive action against it. So I would say complicity comes at EU levels, Greek levels, on local levels in terms of individual units of police, with little actually being done tangibly to respond to it. So this, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And now for Esmeralda, again, summarizing different questions for you. The first question, by the way, from Clara Lecade, who is also working on the deportees, and she's asking if you're in connection with Deportees Association in Africa, in Mali, and also the Association Togolese des Expulsés, and the network of ex-asylum seekers in Sierra Leone, among others. So if you think that there are common strategies and exchanging among deportees globally, and more broadly, if you sense any significant change in the approach that the current US administration is having towards this subject.
Thank you so much, Martina. So these are really great questions and they're all tied together. We are unfortunately not in contact with any organization across sea that might be led by deportees and returnees. We have a couple of contacts here in Latin America, in Guatemala, and Honduras, and a couple of organizations in the rest of Mexico. But it is important to signal out that even though, for example, myself, I've been back in Mexico for almost 11 years, talking about returnees and deportees was not a topic at all until there was a bit of a dreamer coming back movement that didn't really make any sense, because no dreamer was going to come back if they had the DACA protection, right? The DREAM Act didn't pass, but they had DACA. And also when Trump went into the presidency. But they're precisely the biggest accomplishment of the book I was mentioning, called Los Otros Dreamers, was bringing to the light that we exist. So based on this, the fact that we are, even though we've been here forever, the government still, right, we are more public as far as other organizations or a couple of civil society and for cultural purposes, but the government still has no public policies in place to even recognize us as a group that might need, that might be in a special situation of vulnerability, right? Just this year, they're working, Mexico City government, only Mexico City government is working on a law to like address some of these issues. So we are just starting to reach out and make connections, but we do need them to make them. And it's very important because we understand how it can be hard for migrants in transit maybe and refugees to organize, but returnees and deportees have a different setup in life once we're back in the country, and we need to be taking up these spaces, right? We can take up these spaces because we are experts on what is happening to returnees and deportees, and to some extent we are still experts on what happens when you're undocumented in another country because we lived it. And so not only to take up academic spaces and like be visible in the public, but also, and leading to the second question, because we need to hold governments accountable for what our communities have gone through. As for reparations and for channels for migrants to come back. And this is where the unity of these kinds of organizations is important, because I'm sure there are returnees and deportees in all over Africa from the US. And the New Way Forward is not only applicable for like Mexican returnees and deportees, you know, the point is to make it applicable to everybody and then to expand it to the categories that are not already being protected or asked to come back by the New Way Forward. And so we really aren't seeing much of a change in the current administration as far as having arms wide open. There was some false hope in the beginning with the 100-day plan where they said they were going to stop deportations, but then they wrote in little letters only in these 2 scenarios. But even though there is no like jumping towards migration, a sensible migration plan, we do see a chance to push and hold them accountable for what they said. Maybe even if they promised some stuff, you know, like when they were campaigning, and now it's the time to hold them accountable, even though it doesn't look like they're coming through. This is the moment to hold them accountable with initiatives such as the New Way Forward. And that entails that we need to be known in general, right, to the general public, and that organizations like ours, like the ones that they comment from Africa and from other places and from Central America, from Latin America, so that we can push for these legislative changes that can benefit all of the community and hopefully push for family reunification for all of us, or most of us at least.
Thank you, Esmeralda. So now I move on to, a question for Bill, which is, I think, a quick question for everyone. So I guess if also other presenters, please feel free to expand on this point. And the question is, what would better way for academic and researchers to support your work through their research, but in general, I would say not only the work of your organization in this exchange, let's say productive exchange between academia and migrant solidarity network? Do you have any example of positive collaboration?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
When the detention centre was opened near Oxford, we found that a really important experience for an academic was to come to a demonstration and see the place and see the action and hear the voices from inside. And the second thing is to visit a detainee in detention. And there's nothing like a concrete experience to anchor academic work in something useful. So academics could consult people who have been in detention and campaigning organizations when they frame their academic projects, like a doctorate or whatever it might be. And the project should be framed always in mind to what is the benefit for the migrants? What is the positive benefit of this project? And finally, one example of this, I don't know how successful it is, but at the University of Exeter, there's a project called Asylum Network. And this is an example of an academic group. It has people in other universities in Britain. It's an invitation to activists to suggest projects for academic investigation. It's called Asylum Network, and it's based at Exeter University, where Nick Gill is the person responsible.
Yeah, maybe Chloe, you wanted to?
Yeah, sure. It's a super good question. And I think it's something that we've had in mind quite a lot with the Border Violence Monitoring Network. So to explain again briefly the structure. So BVMN is comprised of groups that are working in the field, doing very kind of direct everyday support to transit communities, people on the move, to asylum seekers throughout the region, whether that be through food, NFI distributions, legal support, this kind of thing. But also people that are working more as researchers, more as people focused in advocacy or policy related stuff. And so as a horizontal network, we're able to kind of have more collaborative work between people with different focuses. So for example, can take them kind of on the ground, very kind of grassroots, immediate experience of folks who are in touch with people on the move every day, and kind of create connections with people that are more academic in their focus, and have kind of conversations between people with different backgrounds and be able to produce things based on our shared goals that works at multiple levels at the same time. So it's the very on the ground work, but also the academic outputs, but also policy and advocacy related work. And having a very horizontal structure has made this kind of more feasible, I think. So at least this is the way we've kind of conceptualized it for now.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to intervene on this point. Yeah, Esmeralda.
This is a very important question because since ODA in Mexico at least is very unique as into this grassroots organization community formation, we are often approached by researchers and news media outlets and all kinds of things, right? Kind of like with the subject approach of or object approach of here's the community and I'm gonna study you, right? And so what ODA has had to do is set up a protocol that every researcher has to follow, which means that they have to give something back to the community or there will be no interviews whatsoever. And the most popular option is for them to volunteer for a 6-month period in ODA in one of the areas, because also volunteering is how we get work done. You know, we're a grassroots organization, we're a civil organization for nonprofit, and it's hard to come around funds. And so most of the work gets done by these awesome volunteers that work with ODA. And within this protocol, it is clearly stated that the hours that they spend with ODA are not part of the research at all. They do their volunteering and then they seek a connection through the staff with the rest of the community for only the people that want to participate as well. And we have found that that is very important in community building, because then they stop looking at us like things and we become friends and they become part of the community, and we build long-lasting relationships of things that, and we work together, you know. We've had volunteers for that stay over a year and then come back and like apply for an actual work position or something like that. So that has worked well for us. But for starters, there is this kind of filter that needs to be passed by the researcher, because it is their duty to make sure they are doing their work ethically and that it contributes back to the community.
Thank you so much. So in order to be sure that there is time for everyone to address the question, I move on asking Jane. There are few questions about the role of Frontex in so-called third countries. So if you have any information about the deployment of Frontex officers in Jordan, but also in Sahelian states, in Ghana and in Gambia. And if so, I mean, what is Frontex doing there? And related to this, which kind of accountability, in your opinion, might Frontex have, right, concretely? So building on this amazing work that Statewatch is doing, do you envisage any concrete, let's say, outcome?
Okay, I'll start with the first question, which I think is about whether we have information about Frontex deployment in certain states. In terms of, I think one of the questions I saw referred directly to liaison officers, and we don't have any information other than the public information on Frontex's website about Frontex liaison officers in Turkey, Niger, Western Balkans, which is based in Serbia and in Senegal. However, there are other ways that Frontex obviously has like representatives in various states. So for example, particularly relevant to the Sahel states would be the Africa Frontex intelligence community. So Frontex within this network might be training border guards in certain IT use or surveillance technology. They have risk analysis cells, and I think in 2019, I'll just see if I can check. They opened risk analysis cells, I'm sure, in Gambia and Ghana, Gambia, Senegal, and Nigeria. There's also, so this information is just found kind of by trawling through the general reports of Frontex, which we have collected in an observatory. So I'll just share that link. So we've recently relaunched this observatory on Frontex, so hoping to make it a little bit easier for people to find information quickly, published by the agency or about the agency, or found through access to documents requests to the agency or about the agency. So the aim of this is to make that information a little bit more accessible. So yeah, and particularly because their own website is particularly difficult to navigate and often doesn't have this information on it. Yes, so so I'm not sure I can answer completely to like definite locations of officers in certain states. I know that the European Return Liaison Officer network is now coming under Frontex supervision. So it will have more direct oversight of EU representatives in non-EU states. And I just maximize the screen. I think I'm missing a point. And then could you just remind me of the question about accountability?
Yeah, there have been few questions about how do you think that Frontex can be made accountable, right? So I mean, I can expand on this question, asking, building on the work that Statewatch and also other organizations are doing, do you see any concrete outcome result on the medium or long run in terms of making Frontex accountable as a European agency?
Yeah, it's a particularly hard question for a couple of reasons. I think, like, firstly, like, it's great to hear about Statewatch's work being seen as great, but obviously, like, a lot of that work is really done by like groups like Border Violence Monitoring Network and other groups who are on this call, and we more collate and research and present. So definitely want to make sure credit is where credit's due. And then it's also difficult in terms of like, yes, I think accountability structures could improve, and I think that the various mechanisms, which I'll happily go into in a minute, that have kind of come up recently, are a good sign in that direction. However, I think that focusing on improvements to Frontex accountability risk missing the real issue, which is that Frontex is designed to keep arrivals down and applications for asylum down. It's not designed to conduct search and rescue, to ensure safe arrivals, or to really genuinely be accountable for fundamental rights violations in its operational areas. So it's possibly not looking big enough, I guess, to focus purely on accountability. However, having said that, hugely important, obviously, for an agency that's operational and so powerful in so many areas. So I think we can see good signs from the efforts of accountability that have emerged recently. So to very quickly run over what those are, and hopefully I'll have time to kind of share some hopes for them. I've just shared another page from the observatory that details the various groups and efforts to hold Frontex accountable at court. So there is an internal working group of the Frontex Management Board. I don't think hopes are particularly high that will improve accountability or transparency. There's also various European Ombudsman investigations that are ongoing, and probably hopes are a little bit higher because in the past, Ombudsman own investigations have, for example, imposed the complaints mechanism on Frontex. And I did see a question about whether there's hope for that being slightly more efficient. And I think to very quickly try and answer that, that would all come down to the new fundamental rights officer who's just been appointed. There's been a lot of investigation recently about efforts within the agency to undermine the previous fundamental rights officer, as well as the consultative forum's powers. So I guess it really depends like how efforts to improve those mechanisms go as to how the complaints mechanism might be implemented more genuinely. There's also actions against Frontex, for example, by Lesbos Legal Centre and Frontlex, which are really interesting to look into. And those are actually trying to bring judicial accountability, which might be a bit of a game changer. And then I'll finally touch on the European Parliament Frontex Scrutiny Group, which I think I really rushed over before and misrepresented a little bit maybe, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I think this was a group that is making public some of the issues that have been behind closed doors for a long time about Frontex. Yeah, I mean, I think the report of this group, and I think probably Erik could speak with a lot more authority on this, is due in June. And so efforts from civil society now are really to ensure that that we're able to submit information that we might have that maybe hasn't been considered yet, to ensure that it is in that final report, and hopefully the mandate of the group in the future would be able to ensure that some of those recommendations are implemented.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, James. I'm conscious of time. We have 5 minutes left. I have a question for Erik. I mean, related to what you said about the limits of a critique of border controls that stop at the moment of denunciation, right? So I was wondering, and I totally agree with you that there is the question of how to improve people's lives and migrant lives, and this is not something easy to be done just by criticizing what the European Union or single member states are doing. So I was wondering, in your opinion, which kind of discourse from the left can be crafted in this moment, right? In particular, in a moment when the institution of asylum as such is under threat with the EU Migration Pact, and how strategically we can mobilize some like justice claims, right? So I was wondering also the level of production of knowledge and discourse, also by staying on this level of discourse that, however, is important. We have heard from other presenters what they are doing in more concrete terms, but also the level of media and discourse is crucial. And I think, yeah, is also a good way for ending the panel with your answer.
I try to be short. Maybe there's room for another question. So of course it's a big question, and I like, don't get me wrong, I'm like the last person to just criticize the left for criticizing the others or whatever. That's not my main point, I would say. But I have the feeling that sometimes it's important that we focus a little bit more on the question, what is a symptom and what is the cause of the problems? And there, for example, let me talk briefly about Frontex. I know that Frontex is somehow designed to violate human rights or to hide that human rights are violated. If you just abolish Frontex, there will be national coast guards committing crimes without any scrutiny of the European Union, of the European Commission, or the European Parliament at all. So the question for me is how to make visible that Frontex is not just there created by some external force or whatever, but Frontex is just a symptom of the opinion of the European Union member states sitting in the management board of Frontex. 27 member states representatives and 2 European Commission representatives who are making Frontex do what they want to do. If they want, if they have a majority, they can immediately make Jane the new executive director of Frontex tomorrow. I don't know if like Jane would accept to be the new executive director of Frontex, but it would change a lot, actually. That would change a lot. So you can change, of course, the structure of Frontex, and you can make them search and rescue organization if you have an executive director which is just put there because you want to make Frontex a search and rescue NGO. And I don't know if my point is clear, but I think the most important point of criticism is that we don't just say, oh, the European Union failed and the European Union is a bad whatever actor in something, but that we try to find out who is responsible for what, and that we really dig into the problems, as for example Statewatch and border violence monitoring are doing. But what I also see is that there is very much general criticism of, for example, the EU, which do not hurt someone because nobody feels responsible for the EU. So that was basically my point about criticism. And I would also say that it's very important to make visible that it's not just the living conditions here and the pushbacks there. It's a strategy to abolish the right to seek asylum in the European Union, and that's what we are confronted with. So we should not play another game. We should not play the game of making like people feel that there is a lack of humanitarian aid or whatever. Humanitarian aid, of course, important. You can help people, important, but that's not the solution of something. Yeah, and that's just I want to focus on that. We play the same game as our opponents. And maybe just one last sentence. I think it's also, and don't get me wrong on this, but I think it's also important that we don't have a strategy as a left to fight for human rights. I think it's also important that the left have a strategy for achieving a majority in the end, because I think if a majority is against minority rights, we will not have minority rights at all in the long term.
Thank you so much. I think this is really a perfect conclusion for this great panel. So I agree also absolutely with you that the problem cannot be solved by abolishing single European agency, but by understanding and rethinking freedom of movement and claiming freedom of movement together with other justice claims. Yeah, I think we can close it here. We are perfectly on time, 6:30. I don't know if the organizers want to say a couple of words to conclude it, or if it's up, if I can do it. If I don't hear from them, yeah, maybe Sarah?
Yes, but go ahead and say what you want to say, and I will come in after you.
Well, I want to thank the 5 presenters and also those among you who have been here to attend this event. And I want to thank them also for this extremely provoking suggestion, but also for reporting what they are doing on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much from my side as well. I'm extremely glad having attended this panel. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. Thank you, Dr. Martina Tazzioli, for brilliantly moderating and brilliantly summarizing the huge number of questions. And thank you, obviously, most of all, to all presenters for sharing your work. I also wanted to take a minute to thank the co-hosts of this conference, Routed Magazine, Border Criminologies, and the Oxford Migration Mobility Network, and obviously the entire conference team. Thank you so much, Bella, Philippa, Charlie, Jasper, Trin, Giovanni, and Sahir, and Assad. I also think that this panel really spoke to the debates that we've been having so far, and in particular to the keynote speech by Harshawalia, and I'm glad that we're continuing these fruitful debates. We've really covered, or you have covered, a great range of local and transnational struggles, and thank you so much also for highlighting your frustrations, but also your hopes and successes, and the importance of coalition building. I also wanted to mention that we will make sure that the video that Esmeralda shared at the beginning of her presentation is made available on our Twitter account, and I would really encourage you to watch it, as well as the resources mentioned by Bill that we will also share on our Twitter account. And instead of trying to summarize the panel more, I just wanted to read out a quote by Professor Joy Owen, who will actually be presenting tomorrow and who put this quote in the chat. And I think it summarizes really well the discussions that we were having today about the relationship between academia and activism, and how academia could look like that is not extractivist. So Professor Joy Owen wrote, academics, academic researchers, and researchers need to recognize that they are not appropriately schooled in working with communities and activists. As such, we need to be humble enough to recognize that we also need to be taught how to do this. Collaborative teaching and learning strengthens our collective efforts to create a world that accepts and appreciates difference, however categorized. And just to conclude, if you're enjoying the conference so far, and if you want to show your solidarity with the organizations that presented today, please consider making a donation, which can be done through purchasing a donation ticket on our Eventbrite page. And your donations will be split among the 5 organizations that are each contributing to the conference week: Otros Dreamers in Acción, Statewatch, Oxford Against Immigration Detention, Outconnects, and Border Violence Monitoring Network. If you've not already had a look, the conference special issue is available on the Routed website with contributions from many of our panelists. And just a reminder, all the conference recordings will be published on the Border Criminology's YouTube account shortly after the end of the conference week. Do be also sure to follow along on social media for information on the rest of the conference week, and we hope you'll be virtually joining us again soon. You can still register for all upcoming events on Eventbrite, but also just to be clear, the Zoom link is the same for the entire week, so it shouldn't be difficult to join again. Finally, I just wanted to flag that we have 2 more panels coming up tomorrow. At 11 a.m. BST, a panel on border discrimination that will be chaired by Dr. Willi Holzberg. And then at 5 p.m., a panel on borderlines, bordering, and border diffusion chaired by Samuel Singler. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Take care, and thanks again. Bye.